I never would have thought someone would sign up for a lecture of mine. Of course I'd be happy to show you the ropes. Here, take a seat. Welcome to your first lesson in cryptozoological gastronomy! The goal of this lesson is to introduce you to the goal of this course, to understand monsters inside and out. Let's start with the basics. The Cockatrice and Basilisk are closely related, but fundamentally different. Can you guess what the biggest difference is? Oh, don't feel bad. It's not common knowledge. The main difference between the two is the method of attack. Basilisks use a potent toxin, which paralyzes the victim and leaves them vulnerable. A little history lesson. Since both heads have a digestive tract, researchers argued for a long time about which head consumes the prey. Some argue the basilisk uses the two heads and tears the corpse apart. Others think the heads take turns eating. But actually, the chicken portion of the body uses its large feet to crush up its prey and make it easier for the chicken body to digest. However, they only typically do this when they have chicks to feed. Otherwise, if the prey is small enough, then the snake head swallows the victim whole. Isn't that so cool? Oh yeah, cockatrices are super cool too. They can completely turn their victims to stone. For a long time, nobody knew what was done to the petrified prey. What we know now is that the petrification magic takes a long time to wear off by itself, relative to the victim's natural magical ability. What we didn't find out until recently is that if a piece of the body breaks, the petrification on the severed limb is dispelled, and it will turn back to flesh. So, like basilisks, the cockatrice feeds by immobilizing its prey, and then using its feet to break up the body. Once the petrification fades from the critter pebbles, the two heads take turns feeding. However, unlike the basilisk, the larger cockatrice has to keep both of its bellies fed simultaneously, so they prey on larger species. I've heard they'll scavenge as well. However, an important thing they have in common is that they're really hard to confuse. It's a common trait among polycephalous monsters. There's a lot of theories about how monsters with multiple heads don't get confused. I think they're communicating somehow, maybe by causing different sensations in the shared body, or by some other nonverbal way of communicating. It's also possible that the snake head gives commands to the rooster head and body. The snake is the brains, and the chicken is the brawn. You get it? Eventually, research was done to figure out which head was dominant. If you cut off the chicken head, both the basilisk and the cockatrice continue to move around without much issue. Cut off the snake head, and the basilisk runs around and eventually loses interest in hunting its own prey. In fact, without the snake head, a basilisk can only survive on millet and grains. Meanwhile, if you cut off the snake head of a cockatrice, the chicken half keeps hunting, but with a way lower success rate. That's why I think the snake is the brains. Also, the snake has a heat-sensing pit organ, which makes escaping either monster much more difficult. Oh, but if you manage to hunt one, the meat is so tender and juicy. I mean, I've only had basilisk so far, and I wasn't the one to cook it. So I'll tell you what my mentor Senshi did. Back then, he didn't cook the snake part. I think because at the time, he didn't have what he needed to prepare it. Though I did eat snake once, back when I was a curious kid. If I remember right, you can eat snakes even if they have venom or poison, so long as you prepare and cook them right. Cut off the head, remove the skin, take out the guts and a skeleton, cut it into parts, then fry it. You could probably do the same to a basilisk or a cockatrice if you had the right tools. As for the chicken half, it's not as difficult as you might think. After cutting off its head and the crop, that's where food is stored before digestion for a lot of birds. After that, you have to hang it upside down to drain, then you scald the body in hot water. Once you do that, the feathers will be loose and easy to pluck. Then, remove the remaining organs and the skeleton. After that, he rubbed a lot of spices into the meat and stuffed it with a lot of herbs and root vegetables, though the herbs and vegetables were meant for an injured adventurer. After all that, you can roast it, either over an open flame or in a seasoned pot with a splash of water. Either way, you'll end up with a crisp, salty skin with a tender and juicy bite. If I were to compare it to something, it has the rich flavor of roasted chicken breast with the texture of smoked pork loin. Sounds delicious, doesn't it? Anyway, I think that's enough for the first lesson. For your next lesson, we'll work on obtaining this information from monsters ourselves through careful observation and experimentation.